I walked out of the courthouse with nothing but the clothes I was wearing and a thin manila envelope clutched in my hands. Inside were the papers that confirmed I had lost everything. My wife had just been awarded our $3.4 million mansion, half of everything I'd ever worked for, and she carried a smile on her face like she'd just won a prize. As we stepped through the glass doors, she leaned toward me. For a moment, I thought she might say something kind, maybe some acknowledgement of the years we'd spent together. Instead, she looked me straight in the eye and whispered, "You're pathetic." That single word hit harder than any blow her lawyer had landed in court. She walked away arm in arm with Hank, my closest friend since I was 20 years old. He didn't even glance back. That night, I parked my pickup behind a rundown diner off Route 9. I lay in the driver's seat, staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together where it all went wrong. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something told me to pick up. A calm voice on the other end said, "Mr. Elridge, we've been attempting to reach you for the past 15 years. This is Gallon Private Banking Group in Zurich. We believe you are the rightful heir to an account belonging to Roy Elridge." I froze. Uncle Roy had vanished nearly 20 years ago without a trace. The man read out an account number, then added, "Mr. Elridge, the balance of this account stands at $47 million. My chest tightened, my thoughts spinning. Then the voice said something that made my pulse quicken even more. "There's something you need to know about how it got there. My name is Thomas Elridge. I'm 51 years old, and until last year, I thought my life was steady. Not rich, but solid. I spent 3 decades working construction, swinging hammers, pouring foundations, building homes with my own hands. Every dollar I earned was through sweat and calloused knuckles. I believed in simple values: loyalty, family, honest work, and going to bed tired because you'd given the day everything you had. I thought that was enough to hold a family together. I met Callie when we were still young. I was 21 when we married. She had this fire in her eyes and a way of lighting up any room without even trying. I fell for her hard and fast. Back then, all we had was a small 1-bedroom near Poughkeepsie, a handful of secondhand furniture, and big dreams. I took whatever work came my way: roofing, framing, remodeling, while Callie worked in a diner during the day and studied nursing at night. We were a team in those early years. We celebrated our first tax refund like it was winning the lottery. Bit by bit, we built our credit, bought a rundown little house, and poured every ounce of effort into making it livable. I'd work until my fingers split, and she'd bring me lemonade and sandwiches, sitting beside me on the porch while we talked about the future. I loved her deeply. Eventually, I built up my own crew. Word spread, jobs got bigger, and the money started to come in. One year, I won a city contract that changed everything. We went from barely making ends meet to finally having more than enough. That's when I surprised her with the mansion. It wasn't some flashy modern box. It was a traditional brick estate in Westchester County, covered with ivy, surrounded by tall trees, quiet and private. 5 bedrooms, a wine cellar we never touched, and a garden she once said she'd fill with lavender, but never did. It cost $3.4 million. I paid most in cash and financed the rest. I thought I was giving her a dream. She called it a real home, but something in her shifted after that. Callie started drifting toward another world: country clubs, charity boards, endless social events. Her hair was always perfect, her conversations more about wine tastings than about dinner with me. I told myself people changed, that maybe I just needed to catch up. I tried to hold on to the simple parts of life. I spent my weekends with Brandy, our daughter. She's 23 now, whip smart, with my stubborn streak and her mother's sharp wit. We'd fish off the dock, walk the dogs, or just sit and watch movies together. My mother, Eileen, still lived in the house I grew up in outside Kingston. Every Sunday after church, I'd bring her over for dinner, even though Callie wasn't thrilled about it. And then there was Hank. Hank wasn't just a friend, he was family. We'd built decks together, gone hunting, helped each other move, sat under the stars with beers in hand. When my father passed away, Hank was the one who held my mother's hand because I couldn't find the words. I trusted him more than anyone, more than my own brother. I would have laid down my life for him. But I never saw it coming. Maybe I didn't want to. Callie and Hank started spending more time together. Charity events, late night planning meetings. She told me I was always too busy, too tired. I didn't argue. I just worked harder, believing that if I pushed through, if I provided more, maybe she'd notice. Instead, it all unraveled. I'll give you a rewritten version of your full piece, keeping the flow, tone, and detail, but changing the wording so it feels fresh while still carrying the same emotional weight. Here's the rewrite. I still loved her more than I wanted to admit, but the space between us kept widening. Our conversations stopped meaning anything. Most nights she slept in the guest room, and I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, wondering how we'd strayed so far from those afternoons sitting on the porch eating sandwiches like we didn't have a care in the world. I remembered something my Uncle Roy told me when I was 17. He was always different from the rest of the family, drove a Bentley, wore cufflinks to Thanksgiving dinner, lived like he belonged in another world. One time he looked straight at me and said, "Tommy, never think a roof means safety. Sometimes it just keeps the truth from falling on your head." Back then, I didn't get it. Now I do. The collapse of a marriage isn't a single blow, it's erosion. Trust wears down grain by grain, until all that's left is sand slipping through your hands. Still, I held out hope. I wanted to believe she'd turn back, that we could repair what was left. But she was already gone, mind, heart, spirit. The rest was paperwork waiting to happen. And even then, I didn't imagine how far she'd take it. It was a Thursday. I remember because Thursdays were the days I usually wrapped up work early. I'd been on a deck extension project in Syracuse, laying down cedar planks. My back was tight, boots coated in dry mud, but I stopped at her favorite Italian spot in White Plains and picked up cannoli, thinking maybe, just maybe we could sit outside together and talk. Like old times. Maybe catch a spark before it went out for good. When I pulled into the driveway, Hank's truck was there. Nothing unusual. He often stopped by to help with little jobs or to drop off venison from a hunting trip. But something felt off. The house was too still, too quiet. I came in through the back. The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee, but the air felt heavy. Then I heard it. A laugh. Her laugh. The soft one that used to crinkle her eyes when I tickled her knees. Only this time it wasn't for me. I didn't barge upstairs, didn't shout. My gut already knew. I climbed one step at a time, heart sinking with each footfall. At the bedroom door, I heard Hank's voice, then hers again. I opened it, and there they were, my wife, my best friend. Not shocked, not ashamed, just a silence that said they'd been caught, but didn't care enough to justify it. Hank scrambled into his shirt. Callie sat calmly on the edge of the bed, crossed her legs, smoothed her hair, and in the most even voice I'd ever heard from her, said, "You're early." Hank mumbled something meaningless. I couldn't even process the words. I turned and walked out. No shouting, no fists through drywall. Just me in the garage, sitting on a stack of plywood, staring at the floor until time blurred. That was the moment the last few years made sense. The coldness, the fake smiles, the way she drifted from me, from my daughter, from my mom. All the warning signs I buried. That night, I slept in the guest room. The cannoli sat untouched on the counter. By morning, it was in the trash, and Callie had filed for divorce. There were no long arguments, no last attempts. She was finished, and she wanted to take everything she could. Half, more if possible. I tried to keep it civil, told her we could settle quietly. She laughed, almost mocking, and said, "You're the builder, not the brain. Let the court decide." She hired Donovan, one of the most ruthless divorce lawyers in the state. Sharp suit, perfect teeth, eyes like a predator. He tore me apart piece by piece, claimed I was unstable, angry, twisted small truths until they became weapons, dragged up old subcontractor disputes, pulled financial records from years I'd struggled during the recession, and made them look like fraud. I sat in that courtroom with a tie choking my neck while strangers shredded my name. Callie sat across from me in black, legs crossed like she was posing for a magazine spread instead of dismantling a family. She never shed a tear. When my daughter, Brandy, tried to speak for me, tried to tell them how her mother had changed, Callie didn't even look at her. 9 months of hearings, 9 months of humiliation. And when the ruling finally came, the judge handed her the mansion, most of the savings, half the retirement. Me, I got my truck, my tools, and the ashes of what used to be my life. The apartment I'd rented was nothing more than 4 walls and a ceiling, barely enough to qualify as shelter, but it was all I had left. That was the outcome. I can't say I was shocked when the judgment came down, but what unsettled me was how hollow I felt. Not grief, not rage, just a numb detachment, as if I'd been reduced to a bystander in my own life. When I stepped outside the courthouse, there was no one waiting for me. Hank, who used to call himself my best friend, was nowhere in sight. I pictured him already celebrating with Callie inside the house I'd built for us, filling those crystal glasses I'd unwrapped so carefully on move-in day. She passed me on the courthouse steps, her lawyer trailing at her side, like a shadow. She gave me a single glance, expressionless, then leaned in close enough for her breath to touch my ear. "You're pathetic," she whispered. Then she turned and walked away without hesitation, without regret. I didn't chase her. I didn't say a word. I carried my shaking hands to the parking garage, climbed into my old truck, and sat staring at the wheel. 30 years gone. A wife gone. A friend gone. A home gone. The future I'd been building my entire adult life gone. But the night wasn't finished with me. I couldn't face that cramped, airless apartment with its white walls and stale silence. So I drove, northbound, with no plan, no destination, only the raw need to escape the city that now felt like a monument to my losses. By the time the clock neared 10, I had pulled into a lonely diner lot off Route 9, killed the engine, and leaned my head back against the seat. That's when the phone rang. An unfamiliar number glowed on the screen. I nearly ignored it. For all I knew, it was the court calling about some loose end, or worse, Callie gloating one last time. Something in me wanted to let it ring out, but I answered on the third tone. A man's voice, smooth and distinctly European, spoke my full name. "Is this Thomas Elridge?" I froze. "Who's asking?" "This is Simon Keller with Gallon Private Banking Group, Zurich. We've been attempting to contact you for a number of years. Are you the nephew of Roy Elridge?" The mention of Uncle Roy jolted me back through time. I hadn't thought about him in ages. My father's elder brother, the family's eccentric outlier. While the rest of us worked with our hands, sawing wood, planting fields, Roy was the man in sharp suits and silk ties, puffing cigars, and carrying himself like someone playing by rules only he knew. He drifted in and out of our lives without warning. On my birthdays, he'd slip me crisp $100 bills like they were baseball cards. Then he would vanish again. Nobody knew where he went. "Europe," people whispered. "Made a fortune," they said. And then silence. "Yes," I finally said, clearing my throat. "He was my uncle." "Why?" The banker's voice carried no emotion, only formality. "Mr. Elridge, you are listed as the sole beneficiary of a dormant account. Regulations require us to make contact before automatic liquidation. The account has been inactive for 15 years. Per your uncle's instructions, the funds could only be released under specific legal conditions." My chest tightened. What conditions? The stipulation was that you must no longer be bound by marriage. The words cut through me like a blade of winter air. I sat upright, heartbeat pounding in my ears. I forced the question out. "What kind of funds are we talking about?" He paused, deliberately, it seemed, and then spoke. "As of this evening's statement, the account contains $47,894,421.77. I went silent. My eyes dropped to the dashboard, half expecting the numbers to appear there as proof that I hadn't misheard. My hands shook uncontrollably. "Mr. Elridge? Are you still with me?" "Barely," I whispered. He explained further that Roy had funneled a decade's worth of discrete investments into this account, private equity, old European banking bonds, all tucked away beyond scrutiny. Over the years, it had matured, quietly compounding, sealed behind legal walls of secrecy. I asked why they hadn't come to me sooner. "Your uncle was precise," Keller said. "He did not trust your spouse. His words. He insisted we wait until your marital status changed. He left us with a message for you. Quoted, exactly. Tommy needs to be free before he remembers who he is. The phrase struck a memory deep inside me. 16 years old, fishing with Roy at dawn. I could still see him flicking the ash of his cigar into the river as he said, "Money's just a mirror, kid. It'll show you what you're made of. Make sure you know who you are before you look too long." At the time, I thought it was nothing more than the cryptic rambling of a rich man who liked the sound of his own wisdom. But sitting there in that darkened parking lot, I realized he'd been planting seeds. Keller continued, "We require your presence in Zurich to finalize identification and documentation. Travel and accommodations will be arranged at our expense. Once the paperwork is complete, the funds can be transferred wherever you wish." I didn't agree immediately. My voice was steady enough to say I needed time. He understood, gave me his direct number, and ended the call. For a long while, I sat in silence. The diner's neon buzzed in the background, and I clutched the steering wheel as though it were the last piece of certainty in my life. Everything I had lost, everything that had been taken from me that day, suddenly seemed small compared to the door that had just cracked open. Uncle Roy's ghost had left me a fortune, and maybe a second chance. I stared up at the stars through the windshield, feeling the world tilt beneath me. Everything I thought I knew had shifted in an instant. Strange thing was, I didn't feel triumphant or vindicated, just small, unmoored, like someone had slid me into a life that didn't quite fit. The next morning I called my mother and spilled it all. She listened, then answered in that steady way she always did. That man always knew more than he let on. "Maybe now you can finally breathe." Brandy was next. She paused, then said, "Dad, you deserve this. Don't let it change who you are." She booked a flight to Zurich that same afternoon without a second thought. I shoved a duffel into the trunk, 2 pairs of jeans, 3 shirts, the battered leather wallet I'd had forever, and the watch my father gave me when I graduated. That was it. I left everything else behind. I didn't tell Callie. She didn't merit the courtesy. This wasn't about revenge or courtroom drama. It was about finding out what Roy had left me. Not merely the cash or property, but the reason behind it. A little voice inside kept insisting this was more than money. Zurich greeted me with a gray, efficient sort of beauty. Clean streets, stone facades, and people dressed like the city itself had a dress code. I hadn't left the country since my honeymoon in Mexico, and now here I was tucked into an airport taxi with a bank invitation folded into my coat. At arrivals, a driver held a sign with my name and didn't bother making small talk. The black Mercedes moved through town and climbed to a vantage point above Lake Zurich. The car stopped before an old stone building behind iron gates. Gold letters arched across the entry. Something very official, very private. Inside smelled of leather and polish. A man in his 60s met me in a reception area that felt like a private club. He had the warm, practiced smile of someone who'd sold a lot of secrets. "Simon Keller," he said, and I already recognized his voice from the call. "Mr. Elridge, welcome." He poured coffee into a heavy cup and led me down a hallway lined with mahogany bookshelves into an office that might have been a library in another life. A massive globe, shelves of books, and a window that looked out over the lake. It was the kind of room that made small anxieties evaporate. Simon gave me a thick folder and began to explain. Roy hadn't disappeared by accident. He'd removed himself deliberately from the American financial web. He sold properties, shifted investments, funneled assets into trusts across jurisdictions, and used shell entities and old banking pathways to shield everything. It wasn't illegal, not in the way that mattered to lawyers, but it was airtight and private. Simon slid letters across the desk. Handwritten notes from Roy, stamped and sealed until my divorce had been finalized. The first one opened like a wound and a bomb at the same time. "Tommy," Roy had written, "this might not make sense now. I watched you from a distance. I saw the effort you put in and the man you became. I always wanted to leave something to you. Not just money, but freedom. I couldn't while you were married to her. I'm sorry. I never trusted her. I saw her long before you did." Another page held an old journal entry about me as a child. "Tommy builds with his hands, thinks with his heart. He'll be better than I was." My eyes filled. For a long time, I'd convinced myself Roy had forgotten us. Instead, he'd been orchestrating this gift for years. Simon pushed a document to me that authorized the release of the estate into any account I chose. The assets listed were dizzying: stocks, gold, and even a villa on the southern coast of France. My hand trembled as I signed. In the span of a few moments, the man who'd landed in Zurich was not the same who would return home. The flight back felt like the first breath after a long dive. The bitterness from my divorce hadn't vanished, but something inside felt realigned. It wasn't simply the money. It was the knowledge that I hadn't been abandoned. I'd been stripped down to essentials and found whole underneath. The first call I made when I touched down was to Brandy. She didn't ask for a cent. She asked plain and simple, "So are you coming home?" I told her I was. Home, however, was no longer the cramped apartment where I'd been surviving. It wasn't the mansion Callie now occupied with my old friend. I bought a ranch house outside Nashville instead. Wide land, honest wood beams, a place that smelled of hay and second chances. It was a house that fit the pace I wanted to keep. Hands-on, rooted, practical. Things didn't snap perfectly into place overnight. There were awkward conversations, questions from people who didn't understand why I'd chosen a quieter life over ostentatious displays. Some nights I sat on the porch and listened to crickets, reminding myself that this quiet was by design. The money brought options, not answers, and Roy's letters had offered more guidance than instruction. He'd wanted me to have freedom, yes, but also to remember who I was at the core. Brandy moved back in with me for a while. We cooked together, worked on the land, and she kept me honest, a compass when my old impulses tried to pull me toward grand gestures or petty vindications. She didn't want a life of flash. Neither did I. What mattered was being present. The watch from my father ticked on my wrist, steady and ordinary, a small heirloom that connected the life I'd had to the one I was building. There were moments when I caught myself tempted by the trappings I could now afford. The faster car, the public displays, but they felt hollow. The villa in France sat quietly on the ledger. I visited once and found it beautiful, but empty in the way mansions can be when built to impress instead of inhabit. Roy had given me space to choose. I chose work I could touch with my hands, nights where I fell asleep tired and satisfied, and mornings where the sky felt wide and mine. Some things didn't heal as cleanly. There was the sting of betrayal from people I'd once trusted. There were still awkward runs-ins and the occasional sticky exchange when old resentments rose like weeds. But mostly I felt an uncommon peace. I'd been reduced to essentials, to the people I loved, the land I could steward, and the quiet rhythms that make a life feel honest. Standing on the ranch one evening, watching a slow sky bloom pink over the fields, I realized the inheritance had been more than finances. Roy had left me permission. Permission to rebuild, to choose differently, to step away from a life that never fit. The suitcase I'd brought to Zurich was long gone. In its place, tools, a pair of worn boots, a porch swing, and a family that wanted me for who I was, not for what I owned. I breathed in the country air, and for the first time in a long while, it tasted like home. I built my new place with my own two hands. Land enough for peace, a wide porch that wrapped around the front, and space for Brandy to visit whenever she wanted. Every board I nailed down, every window I set, every plank on the deck carried meaning. It wasn't just a house. It was a reminder that I could start over. Not long after, Callie found out. She called once, then again. The second time, I answered. Her voice was softer than I'd heard in years. She told me she had made a mistake, that she had never stopped loving me, that she wanted another chance. I let her say her piece. Then I told her the truth. She hadn't loved me when I stood tall with everything to offer. She loved what I gave her. Now that I had rebuilt myself, she wanted to step back in. But I wasn't the man she had left behind. She cried, and I listened. But finally I told her I forgave her without forgetting, and that I could never be hers again. Then I ended the call. Hank tried reaching out too. Left a message, said he'd messed up, that things got complicated, that he should have been honest. I didn't bother finishing it. I didn't want apologies, and I didn't need revenge. What I needed was peace. And that's exactly what I found. My uncle's last gift wasn't in foreign accounts or real estate deeds. It was in the clarity he left behind. He gave me the chance to rebuild, not just a bank balance or a home, but an entire life. These days, I wake before sunrise out of habit. But instead of rushing into work boots with black coffee in hand, I sit on the porch of the home I built and breathe in the quiet. It isn't a mansion, just a ranch-style house with a gravel drive, an old oak shading the yard, and a porch swing that creaks because I built it myself. I don't need chandeliers or marble floors. What I need is honesty, peace, the kind of silence that carries no shame. Brandy comes by often. She brings her guitar, sits on the porch steps, and plays while I grill or sip coffee. She talks about her dreams, her idea of opening a little cafe. I offered her money to start it, but she told me she'd rather earn it on her own. That's how I know she'll succeed. She has my stubbornness and her mother's discipline. I just pray she learns to love with more grace than we ever did. My mother, Eileen, still lives in the house where I grew up. I tried to buy her something new, but she turned me down. She said she has everything she needs right there. And I understand her now. You don't always have to move to prove progress. Sometimes being rooted in the right place is enough. Callie never reached out again. Hank never showed up. Their choices are theirs to carry. I don't hate them and I don't hope for their pain, but I no longer carry their weight on my back. I've spent these past months learning to slow down. I got a dog, a shepherd mix named Boone, who sticks by me wherever I go. I joined a local veterans group, not as a soldier, but as a volunteer. I build things for people who need them. Ramps, decks, benches. It reminds me that work done with your hands is always worth something, no matter how much money sits in your account. I also started something new, a foundation called the Ridge Grant. It's for single fathers trying to put their lives back together after divorce. I remember too clearly those nights sleeping in my truck, feeling shut out by the world. No man should face that alone. If I can help even one father climb out of that place, then everything I lost and gained will carry real meaning. Here's the greatest truth I've learned. Your worth isn't in what you've owned or what you've lost. It's in what you can rebuild when the slate has been wiped clean. Money didn't heal me. It didn't erase betrayal or silence the pain, but it gave me the chance to begin again, to step into the man I used to be before life wore me down. So if you're sitting there broken, if someone walked out on you, if everything you thought defined you has been stripped away, know this. There's a part of you that no one can take. That core is still there. You just have to dig deep enough to uncover it. Once you find it, protect it. Build around it. Let it guide you back home. If my story reached you, if it stirred something inside, I ask 3 things. Like this video so more people can find it. Leave a comment, share your story, or just say which part hit hardest. And subscribe, because I have more to tell and you won't want to miss it. This isn't the end of my journey. It's the beginning of something better. And I'm grateful you're here to walk with me.